Hello, Delton. Hello, Jan. Jan, thanks very much for joining us, and thank you so much for all your help in setting up this. I mean, I can't say how much Delton and I appreciate it, and also what a great opportunity. We've had a fantastic time over the last 2 days. Here we are in the Herrenhausen Garden. It's a spectacular venue, certainly really impressive. Jan, could you just tell us a bit about yourself and your introduction and how this ball started rolling?
Oh, well, that's a long story. I'll make it brief on myself. I'm founder and CEO of Themis Foresight. We're a corporate foresight strategy consultancy working primarily with corporates with a wide variety: energy sector, banking sector, mobility, food and agriculture, chemicals. So these are telecommunications. These are the clients that we work with. And obviously, many European companies ask themselves the question: how do we, well, on the one hand, align our profitability with ESG regulation that's coming our way, but then there are some executives who take a much longer view and ask themselves the pertinent questions. Well, how did we get into this mess in the first place? To what extent does industry, well, not only how has it contributed, but how can it contribute to repair the damages in the future? Like most people are so focused on, well, from now on, we'll try to be carbon neutral, and then they've mapped out their way how to become carbon neutral. But even if you do, then there's still a lot of mess from the last 200 years, and then there's very few corporate leaders who take that view, but some do, and those tend to be the ones who are a lot more receptive to long-term strategic planning, like our company does. So, and you know, and that's how I found you. If that story is of interest,
well, that is of great interest to us. I mean, as you say, there's a lot of uncertainty and huge risks to manage. It's a massive problem. I mean, one of the things that I find conceptually so appealing about the global carbon reward is lots of companies are grappling with this concept of Paris alignment and how to meet the Paris targets, and that the policy that Delton's formulated, we think, offers the potential to be a universal metric or an objective way of measuring the risk. And once you've measured the risk, you can start to allocate it or comply with it. I just wanted, Delton, do you want to say a bit about how the global carbon reward came about and how you kind of measured the policy and how it's developed?
Yeah, it came about after a lot of thinking. Actually, it took me almost 10 years to get to this point. A lot of navel gazing, deep thinking, and I kind of followed a pathway of assuming that there was a policy that was kind of complementary and opposite to taxes and cap and trade. And a big part of this thinking was that if you have another market instrument and a complementary policy, you can't be using this policy for solving exactly the same problem, which means, in economics language, improving social efficiency, cost versus benefit. And then in my analysis, I came to the interpretation that what we're actually pricing with the carbon reward is systemic risk. And the reason I think that makes sense is because the whole policy, the way it's structured, is just very good at managing systemic risk. When you look at all the different systemic problems we have. Take, for example, you're mentioning corporates and their ESG reporting or their disclosure about carbon emissions and so on. These companies, if they self-reflect on what they're doing, they would probably come to the conclusion that whatever they do is not really going to change things for the world. They probably a bit confused about how fast they need to decarbonize to be so-called Paris aligned. The way I look at it from a very high level, no company can be sustainable unless the global economy is sustainable. So if you have a macro policy, macro financial policy that has a chance of bringing the economy into a sustainable pathway, and that metric that you create, call it the floor price of the carbon currency, that's pricing risk, well, that's a good metric to put in your corporate ESG reports. For example, if companies are decarbonising and they're earning the carbon reward, in the context of the global economy, it means that we're moving towards net zero with some confidence that we might avoid 2.5 degrees or 2 degrees. So it's the right metric to use. It's coordinating the world. And then for the corporate, when they do report their earnings of carbon rewards or carbon currency, it means that their balance sheet is stronger. It means they're contributing in a meaningful way. And even if they don't earn it, they can always purchase it as part of their financial assets, and they can report what carbon currency they own.
I see.
So
that's an important aspect, actually, then how it reflects on the balance sheet. I would like to go back to something that you said right at the beginning. A company cannot be sustainable unless the whole world economy is sustainable. And that's I want to reiterate this because that's not how most people think. So right now, what I observe both in societal discussion, be it in media or in politics, or just at a restaurant or a beautiful garden like this one, or in the corporate context, at least in Europe, to a large extent also in America, the debate is skewed between two economic growth paradigms. One argues that green growth is possible. However, the proponents of this model cannot explain away how production can go without, or can work without, the use of natural resources. So at best, what you do is you exploit, or shift the exploitation of global boundaries. So that model cannot be sustainable. Then on the other hand, you have those who argue for post-growth or degrowth policies, which, I could be cynical and say, try telling that to the Africans who have never, achieved a level that, that we have, and fine, if people in Germany want to give up consumerism, I'm all for it. But let's also remember that 2020 was the year when anthropogenic mass, i.e. mass produced by human beings, superseded the amount of biological mass on the planet, including human biological mass. So that means we have a legacy of 10,000 years that we somehow need to deal with. And that's not being answered by, we just won't consume anymore, we'll consume less. That's not a good policy. And furthermore, it will actually do something to the social fabric of Western society. So I think both policies are fundamentally flawed, but within that flawed paradigm, the debate is taking place. And so I was confronted several times with situations like this in a corporate environment where, literally corporate executives were either in the one camp or the other, or very often both, and then, they would argue with each other, quite heated debates, but they wouldn't transgress. So that's, then our work was, where do we find something, or do we need to develop something that transcends this wrong debate? And that's how I found you guys, essentially. I'd read The Ministry of the Future, and I thought, that carbon currency thing in there, that sounded interesting, and I was like, actually, maybe there are some people that have already given some thought to this.
It was such, for me, it was such an amazing surprise to find that, beneath the book was actually a very well thought out principle that you could actually see as a route map out of here. And that for me was, it was the first time I've had any positive thoughts about how to beat, how we can sort of tackle climate change effectively.
Right.
Now, I mean,
Actually, let me add one other point. So in any event, so with that got me into a way of thinking. See, how does it transcend both camps?
Green growth and degrowth.
Yeah, and basically, when you think about a concept of a carbon economy, economy in a sense of how the old Greeks defined it, like kind of a household, that then automatically lets you pose the right questions. How do we need to produce? What technologies perhaps need to be innovated in order to be able to produce in sync with natural cycles? How does the second law of thermodynamics fit in there? Do we violate it? In other words, are we proposing something that's never going to work, or does it work? And thinking along those lines actually helps to develop long-term profitable business, which then in turn is probably also going to be good for society. So that's what I thought. That was my initial attraction with that proposal.
And it's so interesting because at the moment I feel, I mean, you must, I guess, have a better handle on this than me, perhaps. But when companies now are looking at ESG as a lawyer, it's such an incredibly wide concept, very onerous, lots of complex regulations they're being hit with, and it's a very difficult subject to feel completely confident that you've got a handle on it. And how do you report on climate risks when these risks are outside your control?
And it leads to a lot of frustration. Actually, the more this frustration builds up, I feel, or I observe, a tendency to, just out of spite, get rid of all the discussion on how to combat climate change. I mean, just give you an example. Recently, a board member of a smaller retail bank, but still significantly large, that it needs to report, mentioned that their ESG report in 2022 was like 16 pages. In 2023, it had grown to almost 60 pages, actually doubling the number of the annual report that they earlier submitted. And he said, but truth is, we didn't do anything to repair any damage to become more climate neutral. We're just reporting numbers, and I'm spending lots and lots of money on compiling a report that does not do any good.
Yeah.
So it's the question then is identifying what are the effective regulations and what's the balance, I guess, of what kind of regulations do we need? Do we need sort of sticks, carrots, or carrots and sticks, and how do we center them? I mean, Delton, just as probably as a lawyer, the first thing I kind of want to know is how these contracts are all going to work, and how do you see everything sort of being implemented? I don't know if you give us a high-level view of that.
Yeah, sure. What we're talking about now are the long-term agreements between the Carbon Exchange Authority that issues the carbon currency, XCC, to the projects that decarbonise. So it won't be available just to any project, because the authority will selectively and strategically figure out what sectors of the economy need to be targeted.
Yeah.
So if you fall into that group, there will be a reward rule made available, or a reverse auction.
Yeah.
And we need some examples to make this make sense. So if we do an energy asset exchange, we'd speak to, say, an oil company that has a reserves, let's say, in the Congo of Africa, and we do a reverse auction, and if their offer comes up, we say, okay, we'll buy you out with XCC to a price point that seems reasonable. The contract says, we'll give you this money in tranches. They agree to leave the fossil fuels in the ground indefinitely, more or less, or at least for the duration of the contract, which is 100-year rolling forward.
Yeah.
Then they will go about do their own feasibility studies or pre-feasibility to figure out how they're going to take this money, the XCC, and invested it in renewables. So the Carbon Exchange Authority might give them some suggestions. They might say, well, actually, we need some green hydrogen over here, and the people over here need some wind and solar, so they will invest it where they think it's appropriate geopolitically. And then they go about this much the same way any energy company would. They would do the pre-feasibility, that would be funded by XCC. They move to feasibility. Then when they go to construction, they might borrow. Yeah. They might go to development bank, commercial bank, and borrow maybe 20, 35% or more, attract some equity funding, build out a $200 million solar plant or something like that. As it comes to completion, the final tranches of XCC are provided. And over time, they're monitored. So if they don't maintain the plant and if they don't look after the community, they can be penalised where their contract says they have to give back XCC.
So there's a mechanism in the contract which ensures compliance. That's the way of sort of monitoring how the contracts will be performed.
Correct. So the performance will focus primarily on the clean energy they're providing and leaving fossil fuels in the ground. There's a bit of ability here to influence them to support developing countries so that the finances go to these developing countries that desperately need this revenue. That's the idea, because this is debt-free funding. It helps them escape the debt trap.
And sort of one way in which we talked about this or expressed this is that this is sort of a preventative insurance contract, and it's a way of ensuring that there is a sort of collective and managed response. But I guess another way of looking at it is to say that this is an excellent. This is not an excellent, but this is a route map for companies now that are just currently wondering, what do we do in this situation? I mean, this offers them a way to transition in a way that they can understand the risks and do the right thing.
Yes,
they understand what the environmental balance is, but it's all priced in. Is that right?
I think so. I think from the point of view of corporates that have big industries, be they shipping companies, aviation, they do have a fiduciary duty to serve their shareholders and what have you, because that's why they're employed. So I'm not saying that they're entirely guilt-free, or I'm not saying that I morally agree with what they're doing. I'm just saying this is the reality in the modern world with the way the economy works and finance works. You can't simply run your business into the ground for some idea of saving the planet, because it doesn't make sense anyway. You need the whole world to coordinate. And so, sorry if I'm going off track. Keep me on track with the question. But
it's a pragmatic response. It's a pragmatic response to a very difficult problem, and it's not really taking a moral position, and it's not attempting to negotiate with climate science. It's basically saying this is a problem we have to solve within.
I think we touched on morality just a moment ago. You're talking about preventative insurance. I think this needs to be stated explicitly, and that is policies do have to have a moral framework. And for example, the carbon tax and similar policies are based on the polluter pays principle, which is a moral and legal concept. Here, it's not the polluter pays principle, and I believe what the principle is preventative insurance, because we're trying to avoid systemic disasters and we're managing systemic risk of the carbon cycle. And ultimately, it's a form of insurance, because in situations such as this, conventional insurance, such as an insurance policy where you pay some money in case your house burns down, that's not going to work at the planetary level. Because if the planet is disrupted and the biosphere is degraded with a sixth mass extinction of species, for example, there is no bank in the world that can buy us another planet. So you're forced into preventive action. And so if it's about managing risk and its prevention, why not call it the preventative insurance principle? So that's the moral argument.
Well, it's always fascinating to see Dalton talk about it, Jan, because I mean every presentation is slightly different. The idea is refined over time, which is natural. And yesterday we heard Delton talk about what he's described as the bird cage issue. Now, I wondered if in your experience, it sounds like you had a lot of time talking to boards, and whether there's a sort of situation where things they might say to you in a less formal context, and there's things that they say when they're actually in a board meeting, there's a sort of difference. And this, I just wondered what your kind of take on that is.
Well, it is a reality. I mean, you've seen the responses yesterday and today at this conference, and parenthetically, we're at the Capital Markets Conference of NordLB, which is a state-run local bank here in Germany, and they clearly look very relieved when you propose a carrot and sticks approach. But then there were also policymakers in the room that have been busy for the last 10 years, preparing sticks legislation. So there the response was perhaps a little less kind. So but at this conference they opened up, and then tomorrow they have to answer shareholders, they have to answer other stakeholders' interests, and then they're back in their world. And then so we're probably in for the long haul in advocating this policy, and then the pressure of daily business, be that in the sphere of politics, be that in the sphere of meeting profit targets, revenue targets, whatever the role of the executives are, is immense. That said, what I also did observe in various projects that we did, there's always a point where someone will say, well, we can't go this alone, or so the question really is, who's the first one? Because actually there is some element of well, let's talk to our suppliers, let's talk to partner companies that we work with, and then there, at least I get the feel that there is a craving for a better system to the typical carrots approach. And so then when I do enter the conversation on the global carbon reward and discussions on road mapping towards a carbon economy, there is more openness. Let me put it this way, and then that's kind of where we are now. I mean, we're fundamentally proposing to make a significant alteration to a global financial system, right?
Yeah. One of the things which was, I guess, entirely expected, but nevertheless, we've probably got to cover this sort of interest of fairness is if what we're doing is a form of quantitative easing, although targeted over time. I mean, the obvious sort of question that's going to arise and did arise is what are you going to do about inflation, and how do you manage that risk? I don't know if you want to cover that, Del.
Yeah, it's a very important question, and what I've noticed is that inflation is a word which seems to trigger reactions, and it's like touching a raw nerve.
Especially
just the word.
Especially at banking conferences.
Well, and not only, and also particularly here in Germany, with 1923 really having significantly contributed to expropriating the middle class and and the rise of Hitler.
Yeah. Well, first of all, we have to acknowledge that monetary inflation is a function of the amount of money in circulation. So you've got to take into account how much money goes in, how much money comes out, and how much money you need, because if the economy grows, you need more money.
Right.
So simply adding more money into circulation doesn't necessarily cause inflation, because it depends on whether the economy is growing or shrinking as well. So there's a lot of variables. This policy uses a new kind of strategic quantitative easing. I call it carbon quantitative easing. And it's not like QE from the global financial crisis or the COVID recession. It's saying, look, all the central banks have to coordinate to do carbon QE, and it's only used when the marketplace, the buyers and traders of currencies, aren't buying enough of the carbon currency, the XCC. Mm-hmm. So if they're not buying enough and the spot price of the XCC sort of drops below our planned floor price, our price floor, then the CQE kicks in to put it back up.
Yeah.
So it's only a periodic, occasional thing when the market demand is falling.
Yeah.
So it's a kind of a fair approach, because it's saying, look, we give it to the marketplace to trade because it will be attractive as an asset, an investment, given the price floor, which is guaranteed by central banks. So it's an appealing asset. But if the financial system just can't cope with it, it can't buy enough for what we need, it's only fair then, reasonable, the central banks kick in to do the rest of the job.
Yeah.
And that will, according to the policy today, it will create monetary inflation. However, the way the policy works, the carbon quantitative easing, we're going to spread that inflation across every economy that participates.
Yeah.
So you won't really notice it, because exchange rates shouldn't change because of the policy. So if you don't see exchange rate changes, you don't really see the inflation as easily. And it's much less likely that the whole world economy will go into hyperinflation. Mm-hmm. Like that, to think of it, that'd be almost impossible.
And there are controls and balances and checks in the contractual mechanism that you would think that would enable you to direct that, I guess.
Yeah, so if there's funny business in projects where they're defaulting or cheating, we can destroy some carbon currency in response to those. Retain it or destroy it. But coming back to the inflation question, the issuance of more bank reserves to do the carbon QE, it doesn't stop central banks implementing their regular policies and mandates. No. So they're still free to do their usual...
it operates alongside them, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's
sort of, it is the parallel economy, and it's the sort of, it acts as the sort of apex between the two economies.
I think central banks, once they understand what they need to do, they'll be a bit more relaxed, because the carbon QE for central banks is really a very simple operation, and you can almost automate it. So they don't have to do any thinking or scientific analyses. They're basically just trading currency.
My feeling is that they will like to monitor it and understand it. And what will happen is it's not that you're removing national politics entirely from the equation, but you're going to create a different kind of politics and finance, which is more aligned with the problems that we're facing, or is able to process the risk. I mean, we've talked a lot ourselves about how the current system can't process the risk.
It's an interesting topic geopolitically, because when we talk about carbon QE with people, there's one reaction of disbelief that certain countries would never implement it because it requires so much big thinking and change in attitude. But on the other hand, if you were a government, because it's the governments that set the mandates, not the central banks, you have this opportunity not only to take the cost of mitigation off a lot of it off your fiscal account, but you have the opportunity to take the politics out of your agenda. Because once it's taken care of, you're free to then address other politics, which are probably more important to you as a government than figuring out how to fund mitigation, which is just a pain in the neck.
Right.
You know,
well,
fiscally.
It is.
Yeah.
Well, it also it's difficult to explain, and then so it's nothing. At least in the Western world, you would win elections with, right? That said, well, we had this discussion. How do we get into trying this out? You know, like what would be sort of the first logical experiments before we roll it out on a global scale? See, what I always found attractive about the GCR proposal was that it is a truly global proposal in terms of the dimensions, but it also allows for it pretty much allows for every economy to work with it. And what I mean by this, every economy, I don't see that fundamentally the the political logics behind the Chinese or Vietnamese, North Korean, Cuban economies are going to disappear anytime soon.
But I mean, it should hopefully facilitate good policies and facilitate
Exactly.
effective policies, but not cut across people, or it wouldn't be a symbol of imperial power, or it wouldn't be the Bretton Woods Agreement, which is sort of an attempt to dictate.
Right.
It should be entirely kind of a neutral and transparent thing, which isn't attempting to negotiate.
So you could work with that policy in any country of the world, and I thought that was ingenious. Yeah.
I think. I mean, for me, it's been a great 2 days. I'd just like to say thank you again, Jan. It's been great to meet you in person. Thank you for setting all this up.
Thanks, Jan.
Well,
and
I was hoping to actually, at least from you had that slide in there that impressed me. So maybe you want to sketch out maybe it's like sort of the next 10 years. Like, what are the next steps?
You mean the slide at the end about the roadmap?
Yeah, the roadmap. Because I think others need to hear about this roadmap, and I think I really wish others would also pitch in, including reviewing the policies, helping to refine the policies, helping to convince lawmakers to adopt these policies.
Thanks for bringing it up, Jan, because you're right. For us to move forward and to make progress quickly, we need individuals, experts and institutions, NGOs, universities, to read the policy paper, offer their comments, do interviews like this one.
Yeah.
Through that, we will be able to attract some partnerships and the money we need. We want to raise about $10 million to undertake a professional demonstration of the policy, which is economic assessments and role-playing with all the stakeholders. Yeah. We don't need to actually build a currency and implement central bank mandates now. We just do a role-playing and it works really well in this kind of problem.
See how the platform would work and just work, see what the mechanics of that would look like.
Yeah, talk to experts to do a sanity check.
Yeah.
And through this demonstration experience, the assumption is a few countries will be interested enough to talk about a pilot. And this will be organic. I assume it'll be developing countries, and we only need a handful. A few countries step forward. I think with a pilot of the energy asset exchange. So buying out a small fossil fuel resource, leaving the fossil fuels in the ground and showing how it's done, how you can fund directly the build out of some renewables. So flipping the coin on fossil fuels. It will, I think that pilot will be electric in the international news, and it'll wake up a lot of people that there's another way to deal with this crisis. From there, I think it will just gain its own momentum.
Yeah. I think that's important. And then maybe just one last question. I mean, today we spoke a lot about energy and obviously, fossil fuels as the source of most of the energy that we consume on the planet these days. But there are also other issues like, ocean salinity, soil degradation, like all, biosphere degradation. It would seem that the global carbon reward, has already, addressed the mechanisms with which we can also address the other challenges that we have.
Yeah. Look, according to scientists and the UN, we're facing a triple planetary crisis: climate, biodiversity loss and pollution. So it's very important that this policy does address, at the minimum, biodiversity and human community well-being. And I think it does that reasonably well through this concept of reward adjustments to incentivize virtuous investing in mitigation. And that means adjusting the rewards to incentivize co-benefits for communities, ecological protection and energy supply stability. So these are kind of like the extra price signal that we can build into the policy in a very bottom-up, decentralized approach. It takes a bit of explaining, but that'll be part of the pilot, no doubt.
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
That would be good. So I wish you lots of good luck. I mean, you know that you can count on my support. I hope there will be others too.
Thanks, Jan.
That's great, Jan.
Super.
Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.